say workers of the world unite, when I say workers of the world unite, I'm also talking about people who may be undocumented too. Because they're being exploited because they're undocumented.
Right.
And they're in fear of that immigration status. And
why? For capitalism. For capitalism.
Yeah, and then they get used in order to charge less, to pay less for the work. And so then guess what? Number one, they get exploited because they're not getting paid what they should be. And then number two, we get locked out because we refuse to be exploited. So it needs to be a coming together of all of us against the corporate dictators in order to say, no, you're going to treat us all equally and you're going to pay even undocumented workers a livable wage, just like you pay us. It's not going to be one class over another. As far as Florida is concerned, immigrants coming to Florida is as American as apple pie and macaroni and cheese. Immigrant builders are now staying away from Florida, particularly undocumented immigrant builders and construction workers. Florida is already starting to feel the DeSantis law with natural disasters in buildings. And to be honest with you, that article that I shared with you a little bit earlier, not sure if you got a chance to get into it, but we're going to get into it anyway. This has been one that is maybe you can say an unintended consequence or maybe an intended consequence, who knows? But this is out of the Orlando Sentinel. It says immigrant workers who help rebuild after storms fear coming to Florida over DeSantis law. And so we just had a hurricane over the last couple of weeks. I think it's Hurricane Idalia. I think that's how you pronounce the name. And so it starts off talking about how, somebody named Javier, who is from Honduras, came to help do construction and rebuilding over the Gulf Coast. And so now he's afraid to come to Florida because of the new law. I'm going to start here. It says he doesn't plan on coming to Florida even after Hurricane Idalia made landfall in the Big Bend area, killing at least 3 people, demolishing homes, and leaving hundreds of thousands without power. The reason: a state law that came into effect July 1st and enacts a series of immigration-related restrictions. It requires hospitals that take Medicaid to ask about immigration status on intake forms, mandates employers with 25 or more workers to use the federal E-Verify program to check if new hires can work in the U.S., and makes it a felony to drive an undocumented person into Florida, among other measures. Now, just as an aside to Indy, if you want to comment on anything that I'm reading, please feel free to stop me and just, make your comment. But yeah, so I find this to be very interesting.
Well, it's really sad that this kind of law, because they want to go through they want to use the federal E-Verify platform, right? So, anybody, that means that a lot of people that could potentially do that, they're not in the system or they couldn't get through the system. So therefore they're not going to now show up when they may have before. And I think that's a lot of what they're talking about here, right?
Yeah, basically. He also reflects on, his feelings. Says most of us want to travel, but for fear that for going and working for doing something honest, they want to detain us like delinquents. Nobody wants to leave or risk themselves. And it says the Resilient Force, a labor organizing group that advocates for disaster workers, said it surveyed most of its membership, about 2,000 workers, composed of mostly undocumented immigrants and some natural-born citizens. Through virtual chats, one-on-one conversations, and in-person meetings, the organization found that more than half of its members don't want to come to Florida, still recovering from Ian and Idalia and facing the looming threat of hurricane season because they fear the new state immigration law Governor DeSantis signed in May. So they're basically scared to come here and to help us rebuild because of the law that Ron DeSantis signed into law a couple of months ago. And I mean, like you already started speaking about this, but what does this, because as Florida goes, some other states may go in the same direction. I'm thinking primarily of places like Texas. How do you, what type of implications do you think this could be on a more national scale?
I think it could be a shortage of imported workers, which is going to jack up the price of local workers, first of all, for homes, for rebuilding projects, as well as, stretch thin the availability of the best of quality builders, because you've got quality engineers, quality electricians, quality carpenters, and all other skilled workers coming in from all over the country who now will not be. So you'll see a lot of that. That's a big concern to Florida residents. On top of the fact that it may take even longer to recover and rebuild because you don't have as many hands working together simultaneously.
Yeah. This goes into a new subheading. It says a newer workforce. It says the responder and recovery workforce has to scale up during crises such as hurricanes and floods because disasters exceeded the local capacity to deal with the incident. That was from Tim Frazier, who is the faculty director of Georgetown University Emergency and Disaster Management Program. But one of the main obstacles in emergency management is having enough people to respond to a disaster. This is what you just said earlier. And nonprofits and volunteers, along with local community resources, have often made up for the shortages. As a result of climate change, these disaster cycles are year-round, not seasonal, and our gap in human capital is becoming more difficult to manage and difficult to overcome. So this really just makes it, exactly as you said, a more difficult progression for us to recover from these natural disasters. And it is basically, my argument is not necessarily to have quote unquote open borders, but the thing is that by not allowing immigrants who have actually been coming into this country and doing work for well over 100 years, now we're stopping them from coming in just because of a documentation status and basically saying, well, you can't be here based on what? Crime? Based on what? It just feels like it's a discrimination based on some xenophobic tropes, when in reality, if you want to base it on other factors like pay, if you want to base it on other factors like exploitation, things like that, then focus on the reason why they're exploited instead of them coming in. I might have some people that might disagree with me on that, but that's what it feels like.
I mean, they're here. But look, wasn't DeSantis bloating immigrants on planes and sending them to Martha's Vineyard? And was that Greg Abbott in Texas? I thought DeSantis did that too. He's had a very anti-immigrant type of position for sure, at least on anti-illegal quote unquote immigrant, because of what's been happening at our border and with our economic policies and with our military policies that are causing all kinds of battles, south of our border, that are causing these buildups on the border, that are causing illegal crossings. Our immigration system is completely messed up, and it's not allowing for, look, when Trump was in office, wasn't there like no immigration for like a year or something like that from Mexico? It was like net negative. We were actually exporting people to Mexico, if I remember, for a year or two. So yeah, I could understand not wanting to be there. I did read the article, and the Orlando Sentinel, that they had a lot of good points. They're definitely anti-DeSantis, and they have a bias, but they're absolutely right in the fact that these policies have real world implications.
Yeah. So I just want to go over this video really quick, and there's some other points that I want to make, because I think it's important that we get the scope of why these things are happening the way they are, and it goes into that. So let me share my screen really quick, because I think this is a lot of times when people talk about immigration, they just think of it as a one-dimensional issue, when I honestly think that this is a multi-dimensional issue that we need to tackle. And I would like to do a little bit of that with you here so that we can talk about this. Sure. But let's start off with this video.
Tonight, a new law is set to upend an entire way of life for many immigrants in Florida. One of them is Jesus, a farm worker for 18 years. He left Mexico searching for work and a better life. But now, as one of Florida's estimated 775,000 undocumented immigrants, he faces an incredibly difficult decision: either leave or wait until the state forces him to.
Now, one thing I just want to mention, as well as a lot of people will go, well, these documented workers, they're coming from Mexico. It's like they may be coming through Mexico, but a lot of them are coming from Mexico. A lot of them are actually coming from Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and so on and so forth. So not all of them are Mexican. And everybody,
Panama.
Some people are just like, oh, they're Mexicans. I'm like, no, they're not. In fact, why would I come from a country? Why would I leave a country that actually has universal health care, and they're actually doing better in some metrics than the United States?
Right. They just, they've got AMLO as their president. They seized the lithium. They just made a thing to re-seize the lithium. Mm-hmm. They're joining BRICS. It's not all sunshine and roses. Look, they've got cartels. There's issues there too. But if you're a citizen, I mean, yeah, you have to look at what are the costs here. What are the costs of living to emigrate to the United States? You got to think about what kind of conditions they're willing to leave and endure to come here, and why they're. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, of course. Let's continue.
Telling me he'll work as long as he can here until it's time to grab his stuff and go back to Mexico, adding he has no idea what is going to happen. He's in limbo because Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a law as a way to crack down on employers that are hiring undocumented workers, requiring them to use an online database to verify legal status, banning local governments from issuing IDs to the undocumented, and requiring hospitals that accept Medicaid to ask patients about their immigration status.
That's pretty messed up about the Medicaid with immigration status. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but that feels pretty messed up.
Well, they want to be able to deport them after they give them health care and fix them up and send them out. That's what they want to do. It's terrible.
Yeah. It just feels disheartening to me. But
the move creating panic.
What the law has created is an environment of fear where people believe, that they are at risk.
Studies show immigrants make up 35% of Florida's booming construction industry, but we don't know how many of those are undocumented, while an estimated 47% of the people working Florida fields are undocumented. The Florida Policy Institute estimating losing those workers could mean an economic loss of nearly $13 billion per year and a drop of 10% of the state's total workforce. Fidencio is one of the many migrant workers here in the farming community of Homestead, and he says the consequences of the law will be felt by everyone like him.
I love it's all about profit, right?
DeSantis is going to be breaking up families, and it's up to God what happens next. It's something even Florida's business leaders are worried about. The people in charge of massive infrastructure projects like Daniel Kotze, whose company is tasked with developing the new Miami World Center, a 27-acre, $4 billion project, a worksite employing as many as 15,000 workers.
And it's not just in construction. You're going to see it in all types of service industries. I have a friend that owns a chain of restaurants. He says half of his staff is leaving.
Kotze says new immigration reform is needed to fix the problem.
So as far as the amount of workers that are being diminished is, we're feeling it already, especially as far as food prices. So this is exacerbating what they like to call the inflation that we are experiencing, which I like to call price gouging. But this also gives some of these agriculture and construction businesses a reason to inflate the prices even further and make it even harder for us to be able to afford the necessary goods here in the state of Florida. So I feel like we're going to end up being like New York, California, and Hawaii soon as far as prices go, because they're not allowing for more workers to be able to be here. But at the same time, I'm kind of divided on it just a little bit, because I don't want to see workers become exploited, but at the same time, I don't want our prices to skyrocket. You know what I'm saying? It's they kind of put you in between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're trying to gentrify the entire state this way by making it too expensive. They're pricing everybody out. Look, Reef had to evacuate for this storm too, and it everybody, it affects everyone in Florida. And yeah, you want to eliminate a third of your workforce and as well as the imports, that's gonna hurt. And they've got a bad rep. I know that there's been a lot of studies done and articles written by Popular Information and other outlets about what DeSantis has been doing in Florida, not just with this, but also with education and trying to take on Disney. And there's a lot of issues with Riverboat Ron. So, going all the way back to Gitmo, they call him Gitmo Ron. I know Reef did a story about his time at Guantanamo. So, he's the punitive is the point with him. The punishment is the point, and I think that they're again trying to. I don't know. It's not good, whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. Let's continue.
At the end of the day, you wouldn't have the illegal immigration problem if you didn't have a lot of people that were facilitating this in our country.
The governor's office telling NBC News SB 1718 counteracts the effects of illegal immigration in Florida, adding any business that exploits this crisis by employing illegal aliens instead of Floridians will be held accountable.
Part of me calls bullshit, because this necessarily isn't just, this just puts them more underground. It doesn't necessarily get rid of the problem. And this feels like a Band-Aid to me. And I'll tell you guys why in a minute. But this feels like just a big Band-Aid on a gaping wound that really, somebody like Ron DeSantis doesn't want to cut off the issue right at the source. He just wants to cut it off. He just wants to cut it off at a more surface level. So that's
something he can campaign on. That he got rid of this and he cleaned up that, and he's tough on immigration, and he's he's pandering to a base. Let's call it for what it is. Very often the Republican base is not looking to give a hand up to immigrants, especially ones that don't legally go through the system, that they've made absolutely impossible for anyone to actually go through the system.
Yeah, once I get to my explanation, I'm actually going to be proposing a way to actually curtail undocumented immigration from a way more humanitarian way. So stay tuned for that, and it'll be coming up in a couple minutes. But I actually have some notes written that I actually want to get into. And yeah, this is... God, DeSantis is an idiot. I'm sorry. I can't hold my tongue right now. He's a fucking idiot. Let's get into it. Let's continue.
But advocates looking out for those migrants and Florida's economy say the new law will be a devastating blow to Florida's crucial industries.
A lot of these businesses in the agriculture industry are going to have to grapple with the idea of closing shop.
Not too many people are in line for those jobs. So there's going to be a big void.
Governor DeSantis.
So here's my thing, all right? Why don't American citizens take these jobs? Why don't documented American citizens, why don't they work in the agricultural sector, especially like these undocumented immigrants? Because they know, we all here know that immigrants are exploited, and we don't want the same thing for ourselves. Let's put it out there. Let's put it all on the line, baby.
Mm-hmm.
This is why here in my neighborhood, I like to call my neighborhood Little Port-au-Prince, because it is a massive Haitian population in my area. Some of them are undocumented. They came here. And then some of them work in the hotels as people who do cleaning and things like that. Some of them are undocumented, right? They want to be paid. American citizens want to be paid worthy of doing such hard work, and they're not under the threat of deportation because they're citizens. This is why workers need to run this nation. Workers see themselves in the immigrants and know that they're here because they want to live a good life and provide for their families. This is why solidarity with all workers is crucial. Absolutely. And the thing is that a lot of times people will go, well, they're just coming here out of, because they just want to come. Like, why do they want to come here? Because they actually want a better life. So if they want a better life, why aren't we willing to facilitate it? And it's not just a easy, they just want to skip the line, right? It's not just that, and let me continue because it actually goes to my next point.
DeSantis, who's running for president, sees the immigration law as a blueprint for the entire country.
We've established here in Florida a blueprint for success that other states can follow.
Leaving the path ahead for Jesus and others just like him unclear as they hope to find a new home where they can build a new life.
So why do they want to come here for a new life in the first place? Andy, what is your reason why? What is your explanation as to why they want to come here in the first place?
Well, have we economically sanctioned their country? Have we destabilized their leader and caused a coup at the top, which then set their country back years or decades? Have we saddled their country with an IMF loan that may further fracture and cause division and cause poverty within the country? And then is there rife corruption at the top of all those countries when all the U.S. money starts coming in and the puppets that they start to install that are friendly to capitalistic enterprises that allow the U.S. to come in and rape their resources? I wonder how they end up here. I can't imagine.
So let me go to my notes. So why did they come here to build a new life in the first place? Many don't know the answer to that question, unlike my guest, Indy here, who just laid it out. Immigrants have been traveling to the southern border for work for well over 100 years. But when they came, they left when the work was done, right? Once our border laws became more strict, it forced them to stay inside of our country instead of traveling back to their country. So they came over, did their work, made their money, and then travel back. Now, because of our immigration laws, they can't go back so easily. So they're like, well, I might as well just stay, right? Also, the process to become a citizen is long and expensive. It's also difficult when you're experiencing hardship in your country and you're trying to escape for fear of your life. So many are refugees that are coming into this country. But now not even a refugee can work in Florida for fear of being sent back to the country they fled because of their undocumented status. Many have to flee their countries because of how destabilized it is due to U.S. foreign policy. This destabilization causes government corruption, poverty, and crime to skyrocket, forcing families to flee and to make long, dangerous trips to a nation that doesn't even want them there. So, what's the answer?
Empathy.
Sorry, go ahead.
Empathy. Start looking at it from their perspective. Why are they coming here, and how do we help them once they get here? That's where we got to start. It's, you know, and it's so funny that so many of them claim and profess to be religious and Christians because that is the most Christian thing to do. So feeding the poor and the hungry and the needy, right? I think that they talk about that somewhere in the book, right? You go to church every Sunday.
Yeah. That's a great point. And just to add, workers coming together to implement more unionization, at the very least, unionization. But at least you can push hard for worker cooperatives so that workers can collectively own the businesses and operate them democratically. This increases pay that workers get and helps improve the material conditions for those of us who are citizens, at least. A co-op construction company or a farm and agriculture could be more valuable, and more citizens will be able to work these jobs and they wouldn't face exploitation. We also could collectively change the laws to be more fair for immigrant workers and citizens. If we get rid of the exploitation, both citizens and immigrants could have a fair deal. We don't have to spend billions of dollars of public dollars trying to detain undocumented immigrants. That money could be better used on infrastructure, right? Also, this is why paying attention to foreign policy is so important. It indirectly affects our rebuilding efforts here in Florida because it has exacerbated an issue that was pretty innocuous over 100 years ago. This is why systemic changes are necessary. If you change the foreign policy and you uplift the nations that are, and we allow them for sovereignty and self-determination, they can thrive. Here's the point. People who live in a place that is thriving don't leave. They may travel to visit, but they don't leave, hardly, because they have it good. Solving the immigration issue starts at the source. And so, just like you said, when we have done these horrible things to these nations like Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Chile, and the like, then what happened? It destabilized those nations. Those nations become more depressed. And then the people who are suffering in those nations go, it's a hellhole here. I need to go someplace better. And so let me grab my family, make the dangerous trek up through Mexico and then into the United States, where I may just be detained. But even if I'm detained, I'm still better off. Does it make sense?
And let's not forget the family separations, the forced family separations that were put in place by the same type of monsters that are running your state now. Mm-hmm. And as well as the Trump administration, they encourage it. The punishment is the point. They're sadists in my mind. They get pleasure out of this nonsense, which is gross. It also jacks up their costs, and it's disgusting. It really is. It's union busting is disgusting. Shitting on immigrants is equal. It's so it makes me so angry. I swear I can't even speak.
Of course. And a lot of times, people will talk about, oh my God, we have to get them at the southern border, when in reality, the southern border is not the problem. It's the airports that's the problem, because the people who are coming here undocumented are people who come here under a work visa. They stay long past their work visa and they're still here without leaving. That's the thing. And the thing is that you don't see them going to the airports to stop it. They only go to the southern border because the people are brown. The people who are actually staying long past their visa are actually coming from white European countries, or they are privileged coming from brown countries because they're allowed to, because they have these degrees and they have this education, which makes them look better. And the United States is like, oh, you got an education? Come over. Anybody who doesn't have a formal higher education, you can't come because we don't want poor people, which is classist in itself.
100%.
So that's the issue that a lot of times people don't want to talk about, is that most of the immigrants that are coming here that aren't documented are staying because their visa status has ran out. And so a lot of times, this is why people are like, well, we just got to build a wall. A wall ain't going to do crap. Right? So I'm going to share this video in the chat. I can't play it because of copyright reasons. However, it's also good to see how Adam Conover, he had a show called Adam Ruins Everything. He actually talks about how border walls don't stop illegal immigration, and that goes over the history of undocumented immigration and how it actually started off. So if you guys want to take a look at that on your own time, I encourage you to do so. It is really good to actually go over that. But ultimately, it's when we say workers of the world unite, when I say workers of the world unite, I'm also talking about people who may be undocumented too. Because they're being exploited because they're undocumented.
Right.
And they're in fear of that immigration status. And then,
why? For capitalism. For capitalism.
Yeah, and then they get used in order to to pay less for the work. And so then guess what? Number one, they get exploited because they're not getting paid what they should be. And then number two, we get locked out because we refuse to be exploited. So it needs to be a coming together of all of us against the corporate dictators in order to say, no, you're going to treat us all equally, and you're going to pay even undocumented workers a livable wage, just like you pay us. It's not going to be one class over another.
Yeah. They don't have this major problem in most other countries around the world. They have figured it out. And number one, they have a legitimate process to have people come in and work there and live there. And it's not exorbitantly expensive. And the process doesn't take close to a decade if you're lucky enough to have the resources to be able to withstand that. And then you're getting, think about the people that have to have these immigration meetings and hearings and regular check-ins, but they've got full-time jobs, right? And they've got to, sometimes they're not able to skip work to make these things. And all of a sudden they're in violation because they couldn't leave their job because otherwise they get fired. They don't have an income, and then they can't maintain and sustain themselves. Like, the whole system is the issue. And I'm with you, man.
And they also pay taxes.
Yep.
Because people be like, well, they don't pay a payroll tax. It's like, no, but they do pay a sales tax. Right?
Yeah.
They do pay
on
for
everything.
gas, right? These things that some people just don't get. Undocumented construction worker comes in and he has to go to pay less just to buy some work boots. Well, he just paid taxes on those work boots. And that taxes actually go to your local economy.
Remember, they also don't have health care. They're doing this dangerous work, illegal status, without any kind of formal health care.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then they get to the hospital. God forbid they do get injured on the job. And the first thing that hospital does is says, tell us your immigration status. Yeah.
Wow. So this is why it's so important for us workers to all come together and to leave that xenophobic thinking of, well, they're taking our jobs out the door. Because the thing is that it's not them that's taking our jobs. It's these corporate dictators being so willing to give our jobs over to people just out of their desperation. So the key is to take the desperation away as well as take the power from the corporate dictators away and put it in the hands of us workers.
I want to keep us starving, desperate, and fighting each other. That's how they end up profiting. And we blue and red fight each other while they run away with the greed is one of my favorite phrases to use. And they're doing it here too. Because who's going to end up winning in the end are the capitalists, are the construction companies that will charge more money for the same work because they have to pay more. But they're not going to eat into their own profits. They'll continue to maintain the profitability. They'll just pass on the costs to the rest of the community most of the time.